Didn't see you there. Welcome to the first annual Agent Espo Halloween special. Today we're going to be reading some spooky stories from the Vietnam War. Some that have interested me for some time, and I want to share with you all. Now, the stories may be real, they may not be, but we'll never really know. But I think in the spirit of Halloween and in the spirit of sitting around and telling spooky stories around a campfire, I think it's time we dive in. So go ahead and break out your sea rations, grab a cup of joe, and let's get reading. To read our stories, we're going to break out the historically accurate Mac book. Story number 1 is called The Golden Woman. Demon statue or Saigon hooker? You decide. The first story comes from a Redditor on the No Sleep Reddit. So apparently this veteran, right? You can go read this for yourself. I will post it down below. He went on the No Sleep Reddit, which I guess is like a spooky story kind of Reddit. And he decided to tell his story because he was terminally ill and had a story to tell that he had never told anyone before. So he decided to go to Reddit to write out his story. This is that story. Story number 1, The Golden Woman. Cue the spooky music. I've kept my mouth shut for almost 50 years. Why the hell would I start talking now? Well, friends, terminal cancer will do that to you. Stuff you thought you'd take to the grave suddenly becomes stuff you desperately want to tell someone. Anyone. I won't bore you with the long lament about my time in Vietnam. It was bad for everyone involved. It was particularly bad for me, as I was 5'3". We've got a short king fighting in the jungles. If you don't know what being particularly short during the Vietnam War entailed, let me fill you in. You arrive in country, and a senior officer points at you and says, "You'd be a good fit for the tunnel commandos. Want to join?" Now, technically it's a question. It felt like an order. And so that was my burden for the war. To be a tunnel rat, climbing down into deep, dark, dangerous tunnels filled with people and animals who wanted to kill me. Usually we operated in the huge Cu Chi? That's C-U-C-H-I, Cu Chi tunnel complex near Saigon. But not on that day. On that day we were ordered to investigate a tunnel complex way up north, west of Da Nang. 2 of us were sent into the tunnel that day, myself and Benoit. Now usually, black guys managed to avoid becoming tunnel rats on account of them being so tall, but Benoit was burdened with the double misfortune of being short and black during the Vietnam War. A curse I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. What's up with that? A curse I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. I was first into the hole and Benoit followed. We both had our Model 39s, some C4, our wits, and not much else. If you're wondering why we carried such small caliber Model 39s, go fire a Colt 45 in a narrow tunnel and come back to me. The last guy who tried that got a ticket home with blood pouring out of his ears. We crawled for what felt like an age. The tunnel was a tight fit, which meant it was probably freshly dug. It also stank something foul. That usually meant either spoiled food or some poor VC bastard died down there and was left to rot. After about 40 minutes of crawling in total silence, I saw the tunnel ahead open into a room. I tapped Benoit on the helmet with my foot. I heard him ready his pistol. I climbed down into the open chamber, pointing my pistol at the shadows. The room was dimly lit by an oil lamp. It was also deserted. We took a moment to adjust. It was the longest single tunnel segment either of us had ever crawled through. It also had no traps, which was unusual. Where was everyone who dug the thing? Save for the lamp hanging from the roof and a canvas tarp on the opposite wall, the room was empty. I approached the tarp and used my pistol to move it aside. Behind the tarp was a stone staircase leading down. A stone staircase this far underground? I whispered to Benoit. VC didn't build this. This is old. Very old. Older than America old, Benoit whispered back with fear in his voice. We've come this far, we have to keep going, I replied. We both walked slowly down the narrow staircase. Our flashlights had red lenses, and I swear the illuminated staircase looked like we were descending into hell. The staircase was almost as deep as the tunnel was long. Finally, I saw the staircase blocked by another tarp. Light was coming from the other side. I moved aside the tarp with my pistol. My finger trembled on the trigger. My eyes lit up, my heart raced, and I almost pulled the trigger, but I didn't. Something made me pause. The room had at least 10 people in it, none of them armed. I pointed my pistol at the group and illuminated them with my flashlight. They didn't respond. They just stood there rocking gently forward and back. Benoit, don't shoot. There's people in here, but there's something wrong with them. I stepped into the tiny room, which was only lit by small candles. Benoit followed. We both shone our flashlights at the people. They paid no attention. They continued to rock gently forward and back. I shone my flashlight in one of their faces. I clicked my fingers. She didn't respond. Her clothes told me she was VC. They were all VC. 3 women and 7 men, all gently rocking forward and back. Not a care in the world. Their eyes were a solid color. Which color, I can't really say, as I only illuminated them with my red flashlight. Benoit motioned with his flashlight to the corner. Their rifles all sat in a pile, badly rusted. Jesus Christ, Benoit, how long have these poor people been down here? I don't think Jesus Christ frequents this establishment, came Benoit's terrified response in his thick Cajun accent. Let's go ahead and redo that one. I don't think Jesus Christ frequents this establishment, came Benoit's. Is that racist? What do you think? That's a Cajun accent, by the way. I knew a white guy who had a thick Cajun accent, and everybody thought he was black over the frequency, but he was not black. He was a white guy. Where am I at? I don't think Jesus Christ frequents this establishment, came Benoit's terrified response in his thick Cajun accent. I shone my light to the front of the room. The VC were all facing a small altar. I walked toward it. On the simple stone plinth stood a gold statue illuminated by several candles. The statue was ornately crafted. It was of a beautiful, naked woman, the top half anyway. The bottom half was something like an octopus. Dozens of tiny gold tentacles had been meticulously crafted to the woman's torso instead of legs. The statue had some writing at its base, a writing I didn't recognize. I reached out to pick the statue up and take a better look, but Benoit shouted, "Stop! Don't touch it!" I retracted my hand about an inch from the statue. "We need to leave this place quickly," Benoit said as he put his hand on my shoulder. "Are we just gonna leave them like this?" I said as I shone my light in their eyes. "We'll plant the C4 charges and put them on a 90-minute timer," he said. He was already removing the C4 from a pouch on his belt. "They're unarmed," I implored, turning to Benoit. "These people are dead, maybe worse than dead. I saw something like this before, at home in the bayou." I didn't argue any longer. We planted the C4 in a rush, set the timers for 90 minutes, and ran up the stone staircase as fast as we could. It felt like a lifetime, till we reached the small room with a lamp. I climbed into the tunnel and Benoit followed. Suddenly, we could hear a woman's voice faintly calling from far behind us. "Ignore it! Keep moving!" Benoit shouted behind me. I didn't need to be told. I wasn't going back. It was the longest crawl of my life. I saw daylight and kept crawling even though my hands were raw and bloodied. I emerged into the light of day and gasped for fresh air. Benoit followed. We warned the others about the C4 charges, but told them nothing else. Benoit and I sat in total silence away from the tunnel entrance, waiting, praying. The ground shook, a dull thud was heard, and a spray of dirt emerged from the tunnel. We both breathed a sigh of relief. It is only after an experience like that you ask yourself this small question. To this day, I still ask myself, who the F was keeping the candles lit in that damn room? Let's throw another thing in the fire. So, do I think this story is real? Well, it's hard to say, right? This is just a random user who told this story. Is this a legitimate veteran? I mean, we're not gonna know unless we can find a way to see like if Benoit is real. You know, we're just really not gonna know. Now, reasons I think this story might be fake. Well, first of all, it's Reddit, right? So what Vietnam vet is gonna be going on Reddit to tell their story? You know, I don't necessarily know if they would do that. Maybe unless like their son or a grandson, or I'm sorry, like a grandkid or something like that, told them about Reddit and was like, hey, you can tell your stories here. You know, I'm not really sure. Okay, number 2, if you've ever met a black guy before, all right, they are not gonna play with any of that haunted house stuff, horror stuff. That's definitely a white people thing, all right? So hard for me to believe that a real brother would go down into this tunnel and see this and not just turn around and get out of there, all right? That's number 2, why I think this is not real. Number 3, he wrote like 5 spooky stories that he linked, and they're all like, I was in the hospital and it was really spooky there too, and I had another ghost encounter. It just seems like it was written for entertainment purposes more than anything else, but it is an interesting story. Now there's people that comment that say things like, oh, my uncle's from Vietnam and he knows about all these crazy demonic things that happen there, right? I don't know if that's true or not. But that is an interesting story, and it's one I wanted to share. You can go read it. I'll link it down below. and you can be the judge if you think that's real or fake. Now, on to the next one. Story number 2, the rock apes of Vietnam. Undiscovered primate or Bigfoot's cousin? You decide. So the second story is kind of a more well-documented thing. It's not as obscure or whatever as that other story. That other story is kind of like a copy pasta. The rock apes, however, are a much more documented thing. It's like a more established folklore story, kind of like Bigfoot is. Now, I wouldn't say you can prove Bigfoot, but there's a lot of resources out there that you can like look, when it comes to Bigfoot. So that's kind of how the rock apes are. It's been on paranormal shows before, and there's a lot of alleged first-hand accounts for the rock apes. So I don't have like one particular story to tell about these creatures, but I have several different first-hand accounts that we're going to kind of go through. If you don't know what the rock apes are, they're essentially Bigfoot in Vietnam. They're described a few different ways, but they're kind of an orange orangutan-like creature. It's about 6 feet tall, and they're notorious for allegedly throwing rocks at US troops, sometimes killing them, setting off traps, attacking squads. There's stories of people killing these things, and they're trading and whatnot, and they're also known to have killed like Vietnamese, and locals were known to they were familiar allegedly with these creatures, and the troops that were in remote areas would discover them. As far as my resources for what we're going to be reading stories off of, I went to the first YouTube video that I found when I just typed in rock apes, and I went to the YouTube comment section. Now, a YouTube comment section, you might think like that's not really a good source for stories and whatnot, but right, we have no way of really proving it, right? But I noticed a trend with these comments. A lot of their profile pictures are of Vietnam. It looks like legit Vietnam veterans because they have like 82nd Airborne, profile pictures. They write big paragraphs. If that demographic on YouTube, older people tend to write more than the younger audiences. Like they will write out whole stories and whatnot, just because that's how the older generation was. It's not just like a quick little 2 sentences and they're done. They will write out long stories. So is it possible that people are going to these comment sections on these videos and they're just trolling? Yes, but it's also possible that there's some Vietnam veterans, and I know that there are veterans out there because I can look at my demographics and see that there are older people that watch this channel. And is it possible that those guys are going on these other channels and telling their story? I guess we don't know, right? We can just kind of guess. So with that being said, let's kind of read a few of these that we have here. We weren't able to shoot at them because we weren't where we wasn't. Some of you know what that means. This was in 1967, and I had heard the stories of rock apes but never gave it much thought until that day when 3 of us were being hit with medium-sized rocks and anything else this creature could throw. I remember it was a very hilly area and some rock cliffs were in there. As I said, they looked more like a reddish or orange colored orangutan, but about 12 to 18 inches taller and walked on their back legs from what we could see. After about 15 to 20 minutes, they moved on and figured we weren't any danger to them. I saw nothing that resembled the description some have given, and again we had an encounter with the same looking creatures close to Cambodia. I knew they were the same because that was my job to observe and report what I had seen. Other than that, I have spent a lot of time in the mountains of Appalachian Mountains where I lived for 3 years. I never saw anything that I could really and honestly ID as Bigfoot. They loved circling the campsite during our 8 p.m. meals. We could see the glowing eyes, but never the full size of it. Here's another one. My late father, Sergeant First Class, U.S. Army retired, did 3 tours in Vietnam, told a story about rock apes throwing stones at his troops on the perimeter one night. His soldiers blew their claymore mines thinking the enemy was upon them. Upon examination, he said they killed a reddish-brown ape 5 feet tall with their mines. There are no known apes in Southeast Asia. So what did Dad's troops kill that night? Very fascinating, thanks for the video. So you can see there's just a lot of these, they could be made up, but these sound like legit people leaving comments in these videos. What I would really like is to have a veteran, if you know of a veteran, or if you yourself have a story to tell when it comes to these creatures, email me. I will leave my email in the description below, and we can set something up. If you want to tell your story, I want to give you an opportunity to tell your first-hand story of these creatures. We can keep you anonymous if you want, but I would love to talk to an actual veteran and get a first-hand account on these creatures, we'll keep reading. In 1991, I became a California corrections officer. My first partner was a former Marine, Vietnam veteran. After a few months, he warmed up enough to where he could tell me war stories. He told me where they were on patrol and came across some caves at the base of some giant cliffs. Inside one cave, they could hear the chatter in which they took for Vietnamese. Assuming they were Viet Cong, they yelled into the caves for them to come out, and the chattering got louder. At this time, they tossed in a couple hand grenades and then opened fire into the caves. When they had ceased fire, they entered the cave expecting to find the enemy, but what they found were dead rock apes. He said they had heard about them but never seen them until now. He said there was about 6 or 8 dead ones. He said they were about 5.5 to 6 feet tall, but he could not tell if they walked on their hind legs or all fours, as the ones he saw were laying dead. In 1973, while attending technical training at EERIE Air Force Base, there was a squadron for the rehabilitation of the many Vietnam returnees that were not able to re-establish into regular military life due to the actions when stationed in Vietnam. We were treated too many first-hand war stories and shown souvenirs that served as a reminder of some battle. One evening, a young troop proceeded to tell us a story of a special forces platoon coming in contact with rock apes while retreating back to camp. According to his story, a 45-minute battle ensued, and the gory details were very unimaginable to those of us who were just beginning our military service. The most heart-wrenching part of the story was how 3 members of his platoon were killed by the creatures that seemed to come out of everywhere, and the only fact that the creatures had no weapons other than stones and sticks or whatever was available, they proceeded to tear into the platoon as if they were the Viet Cong. Until the viewing of this video, I'd never considered sharing this story with anyone because it was just so unbelievable, but I'm convinced that this young troop's story is very true and very real. Thanks, Forgotten History, for the opportunity to share this story and hopefully give credit to those many service members who encountered so many unrecorded historical battles that will forever be a part of history. The Rehabilitation Squadron was the military way of dealing with what was known today as PTSD. I've seen people say there's other stories when it comes to like red night vision, which we won't exactly get into red night vision here, but to keep it short, people think that it's alleged that red night vision was able to see through a certain frequency, that you could see into another dimension, and that you could see demons. So there's stories of those guys saying that they would put on this red night vision and they would see demons flying around, and then they would take it off and they wouldn't see it. That could be LSD, or it could be something to red night vision. We won't get into that, but what I'm trying to get at is this seems like it's more than LSD or some kind of drug. If everybody's experiencing the same thing, that kind of tells me like, well, maybe there's something to this. We'll read one last one. My father, Staff Sergeant Stephen Gonzalez, 173rd Airborne, once and only once told my brother and I about a time he and his platoon encountered the rock apes. They were walking through the jungle along a cliff, and all of a sudden they started being pelted by little rocks. The rocks got bigger and started hitting members of his platoon. They looked up and saw hairy-like human creatures. The creatures started getting more aggressive, so the platoon leader ordered them to open fire. As they started firing, some of the creatures were hit. Others ran off into the jungle. My dad said there were about 20 of them, and they killed a few and injured more. His platoon leader said this never happened. They recouped, reloaded, and started moving toward their checkpoint. My dad told the story with much more detail. He didn't talk much about Vietnam. We didn't ask him any questions about his time there, but when he would talk about it, it was very detailed, and my brother and I would listen intently to him. So, is it real? Is it not? That's for you to decide. I'm sure if you guys have looked into Vietnam history at all, you probably have heard stories of the rock apes, and maybe you have something more that you could actually share. If you do, comment down below. But those are the spooky stories that I have for you today. If I kept going, I would probably run out of time and my viewership would be way down. So if you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe, and leave a comment. And if you are a veteran who wants to tell your story with the rock apes, I am more than interested in hearing your story. I hope you guys have a good Halloween. Stay safe out there and keep training. Keep buying kit, keep LARPing. Agent Espo out.